Hi guys, James at Rampant Lion Reviews again for you today with another beer review. For this one, we are going to head over to England once again, and we're going to return to a brewery that's featured on the channel many times before. I've had some really nice beers from these guys over the years, many different styles, and if people were to ask me about this brewery, I would say that they are one of the best known and most respected craft beer names in England, and they do a lot of different styles actually. They're very well rounded, they like to try different things, but yeah, their interpretations of different styles are always pretty damn solid in my experience. But the beer we're going to have a look at today is a style that I have had from them before. This one also has a little bit of a twist to it, which is quite close to my heart, so I'm really curious to see how that one turns out. But this is also a bottle that I found at the back of my cupboard, which I genuinely forgot I had. So this was a little bit of a nice discovery actually, and I just felt that I was in the mood for this one today and thought, you know, bugger it, why not? Let's have a look at this beer. So needless to say, I'm very, very curious to see what this one is going to have in store for us. Hopefully it's another good beer. Hopefully it makes for an interesting review, and as always I hope that you guys watching enjoy my take on this one as well. So yeah, for this review then, we are going to head to a little place called Buxton in Derbyshire in the middle of England, kind of to the southeast of Manchester and the southwest of Sheffield, but that of course means that we're going to have a look at yet another beer from the wonderful Buxton Brewery. So this particular beer is called Moray Flow. It comes in at 13% ABV, and this one is an Imperial Stout aged on Speyside single malt Scotch whisky barrels. So yeah, this should be very, very nice. I honestly have no idea when I bought this beer. I think this might have been back in about 2019 or 2020 or something like that, and I think I just found it over in Kiosk in Copenhagen and thought it sounded really interesting. But yeah, we've had many good Imperial Stouts from Buxton before, so when I saw this one in the back of my cupboard I thought, you know, we really should crack this open and see what it's all about. It's not often you'll find a Buxton Imperial Stout in a bottle these days either. But yeah, let's crack on with this one then and see what it's all about. A Speyside barrel-aged Imperial Stout from Buxton Brewery in Derbyshire in England. So, as always with my reviews then, I'll tell you a little bit about the brewery before we taste the beer. If you want to get straight to the tasting though, just fast forward. All the usual links can be found in the video description below. That's the brewery website, the link to my other reviews that I've done from Buxton Brewery before, and we will no doubt add more to that list in the near future. But there's all the usual social media down there. If you want to see more reviews, do please consider subscribing to the channel. The support you give is massively appreciated, and remember you can go into the channel homepage and search for beer based on the geography tagging system. So yeah, just go in there, use the search bar, put in your hometown, state, county, province, prefecture, whatever you like. If I've reviewed beers from the area that you search for, they will pop up. Failing that though, you can check out the playlist of beers from different countries. You'll find this one in the English playlist along with many other things, and you can of course check out the playlist of beers from other countries as well. So yeah, let's go on then to my brewery notes, and I'll tell you a little bit about Buxton Brewery in Derbyshire in England once again. So, as I mentioned already, Buxton Brewery are based in the spa town of Buxton in Derbyshire in England, and this brewery began with the first ever brew by Jeff Quinn back in 2009. So Jeff had studied physics and also had a background in engineering before he started up the brewery, and for a period of time he cuckoo brewed, gypsy brewed, whatever you want to call it, at other local microbreweries before getting his own facility up and running, and this started in the January of 2010. And in the beginning these guys were brewing very small 800 litre batches. But today, the brewery can be found on Staden Lane in Buxton. They've got a 7,000 square foot brewing space, and at full capacity these guys run a 3,500 litre brew kit, which means they can produce up to 60,000 litres of beer per month, and their beers are now exported worldwide as far as Australia, Japan and over to the Americas as well. But the Buxton beers have won many accolades over the years, and the brewery has been consistently ranked in the world top 100 breweries according to Rate Beer. So these guys are one of the really old school and very established names when it comes to the kind of modern age of craft brewing, if we can call it that, in England. But the local area around Buxton is known as the Peak District, and it's famed for its water, which apparently has been revered since Roman times, and the Romans actually named this town Aqua Arnamitea, which translates to the waters of the goddess of spring. and a number of the beers in the early days of this brewery were actually named after local geographical and geological features. But the tower depicted on the early labels is also, it's actually called Solomon's Temple or Grinlow Tower, and this was a folly tower that was built simply for decoration by the Romans as well. I'm not sure if you still see that on the new Buxton ones today, because they have just kind of changed them to be like text labels, if you like. But yeah, you would have seen that. If you go and check out some of my older Buxton Brewery reviews that I did, you would certainly see some of these things. But since 2013, the brewery have also had their tap house in the old courtyard on George Street in Buxton, and they've got a number of other pubs that are associated with the brewery these days too. But over the last few years, they've continued to build up their brewing capacity, get their beers out there a little bit more, develop new recipes and try different things. But as of May 2023, when I'm filming this review for you, these guys have produced around 280 different kinds of beer according to Untappd, and that will no doubt continue to increase as time goes on. But yeah, that is everything that I can really tell you about Buxton Brewery for the moment. If you want to learn more about these guys, you can of course check out the brewery website. You can follow them on Facebook and Instagram to keep up to date with all the latest goings on, and you can check out the Rate Beer, Untappd and Beer Advocate pages to learn a little bit more about all the different beers that these guys have done. So yeah, that's it. That's your brewery history section of this video. So I'll just let you have a little look at the artwork on this one before we open it up. So you can see you've got a nice little mountain range in the background there, with the old Scottish style bridge. Plain silver bottle cap on this one, as you can see. This is a 330ml bottle. I have no idea what I paid for this one, but as I said, I'm pretty sure that I bought this one at Kiosk over in Copenhagen once upon a time, and it's just kind of been pushed to the back of my cupboard. But like we said earlier, this one is a 13% Imperial Stout, and it says on the side here, aged for over a year in barrels previously holding a single malt Scotch whisky from the region of Speyside. For those of you who don't know, Speyside is the region kind of between Aberdeen to the east and Inverness to the west. I think that is where the highest density of distilleries in Scotland actually is, but the Speyside whiskies for me always tend to be a little bit smoother and a little bit sweeter compared to the Highland or the Islas or the Lowlands and things like this. So yeah, Speyside whisky for me has always had a little bit of a special place in my heart. Aberlour was my kind of go-to when I was at university, but I love the kind of smoothness of the Speyside whiskies. Glenallachie, Glenfarclas, those are some of my favourite ones, I would say. But yeah, the Speyside whiskies, I'm sure, I don't think we've had too many Imperial Stouts or barley wines or whatever that have been specifically aged in Speyside whisky barrels, but I'm really curious to see what kind of flavour this infuses into the Imperial Stout. But yeah, beautiful artwork on this one. I think I will need to keep the bottle for this, and like I say, no idea what this one actually cost me. It does say on the side here that this was bottled on the 8th of March 2019, but it's best before the 8th of March 2024. So we're drinking this one in May of 2023, which is well in date. But yeah, it should have mellowed out very, very nicely at this point. 13% ABV. It's not the heaviest stout I've ever had from Buxton, I should point that out too. But let's get this guy out and get on with the tasting and see what it's all about. The Moray Flow, 13% ABV, a Speyside whisky barrel aged Imperial Stout from the wonderful Buxton Brewery in Buxton, Derbyshire in England. A little bit of smoke on the opening of the bottle there, but let's get this guy out into the glass and see what it's all about. So yeah, let's have a wee look. Really nothing in terms of sedimentation at the bottom of the bottle in this one either, which is quite impressive, to be honest with you. So yeah, let's have a wee look at this beer and see what it's all about. Fire that bottle opener back up there. But anyway, as you can see, this beer is poured pretty much as you would expect from any Imperial Stout. So you can see it poured with about a quarter to a 1/3 finger of a frothy, I would say dark tan coloured head. That has faded away to be a very thin foamy layer in the middle of the glass, but you've got that nice kind of thicker foamy ring just around the edge there. One or two big bubbles sticking toward the side of the glass, a few little ones going up toward the bottom of the head there, but overall it does look very, very nice. Yeah, in terms of the colour of this beer, a dark ebony rosewood, which is exactly as you would expect from an Imperial Stout of any variety. So remember, the colour of your beer depends on a few things. One, the type of malts that you use. This goes a long way to determining your EBC rating. 2, length of your wort boil is also going to play a role, because the longer you boil the wort, the more the sugars caramelise, and thus you get a darker colour of beer. But any barrel aging that you do or adjuncts you put in will affect the colour of your beer too. Although when it comes to black beers such as Imperial Stouts, it's really very difficult to influence the colour of these ones. I've only ever seen this done once with like beets or something like that. So that was from Puasta in Tartu in Estonia, if I remember correctly. But I don't think with a Speyside barrel you're going to influence the colour of an Imperial Stout all that much, to be honest with you. But yeah, nothing really untoward about the appearance of this beer when you consider what style it is. So yeah, I don't think we need to say very much more about that at all. So let's have a wee look at the aroma of this one then and see what it's all about. This should be awesome. Oh yeah, this is very, very nice. I'm going to say straight away, thumbs up to Buxton Brewery for this one. So yeah, just beautiful stuff. It's got a really fine balance in it, this beer, between the kind of smoothness and the slight sweetness that you're going to get from the Speyside whiskies, but also from the kind of roasty toastiness that you're going to get from an old school Russian Imperial Stout, which I'm guessing is the base stout for this beer. I don't know if this is, it didn't say on the website whether this was based on any of their previous stouts and things like that, or if like Night Rain or whatever it's called. But yeah, it's you're always going to get a good stout from Buxton, regardless. I don't know if they've engineered this stout specifically so that it ages well on the Speyside barrels, but it's a beautiful, beautiful aroma, this one. So as I always say, just take a little bit of time to enjoy the aroma of the beer before you get stuck into it, but you will be impressed by this one, I've no doubt about that. Yeah, so aroma-wise, this beer, it's got a lovely, it's got a bit of everything. You've got that nice roasty, toasty Russian Imperial Stout kind of character to it. You've got the big woody notes in there. You've also got a little bit of the infused spirit. You've got some nice fruitiness in there. It really has everything to it that you would want from this beer. So it gets a big thumbs up from me, like I said. Let's just try and break this down and describe it for you a wee bit more then, and see what's going on. So let's start with the backbone of the beer. For me, the backbone of this one, you can absolutely smell that lovely kind of smooth and slightly dry European oak coming out of the beer. And that's absolutely lovely, I have to say that. So yeah, lovely little bit of smooth European oaky note in there. Wee bit of vanilla, wee bit of kind of just oaky dryness out of the beer. But you can also smell the kind of distinct brown sugary notes that you get from a number of Speyside whiskies. It's got this lovely kind of oily caramelised brown sugar. There's a little bit of dryness in there. There's a little bit of butterscotch, butter candy within that kind of sugary, spirity layer. It just smells really lovely, I have to say. I'm curious to see how this is actually going to translate into the overall flavour of the beer. But yeah, the sugary spirit in this one is lovely. I would love to know exactly what whiskey the casks come from in this one, unless they've done it in 4 different casks or something like that, and then blended it together, which is of course possible. But yeah, the Speyside whiskey note in this one is really distinctive. It actually reminds me, if you told me that this beer had been aged in, for example, a Smugen cask from here in Sweden, I would believe you, because the whiskey character that comes out of this one is very, very similar to the Smugen whiskies, actually. But yeah, aroma-wise, this is very, very nice. Yeah, on top of that, you start to get that roasty, toasty, well-fired bread crust coming out of the beer. So yeah, roasty, toasty, well-fired bread crust in there. On top of that, you can smell there's a little bit of a kind of like, there is a little bit of a rye bready character coming out of this one, but it's also kind of like a sort of chocolate sponge cake. Absolutely getting some of that kind of character out of this beer. So yeah, well-fired bread crust, roasty, toasty, highly caramelised like rye bread crust, sweet rye bread, maybe a little bit of a chocolate kind of sponge type character out of the beer. Then you start to get a wholemeal brown bready note out of this one, which is really nice as well. Yeah, I mean, aroma-wise, This is really interesting in that regard, because above the kind of bready, cakey notes, you've got that roasty, toasty, well-fired kind of brown sugary note coming out of this one. You can feel that in the base there. So roasty, toasty, well-fired kind of brown sugars in there. You do have a little bit of like sweet treacle molasses right in the middle of the nose, but you can also smell there's a sweeter caramel underneath that, and then just a slightly more toasty caramel as well. I don't get much in the way of like Werther's Original butter candy, butterscotchy notes out of this beer, but definitely a little touch of nuttiness in there. But the Speyside whiskey and the kind of overall sweetness and oiliness and brown sugary character that you get from many of these whiskies actually is really apparent in this one. So I'm really curious to see how that's going to contribute to the overall flavour of this beer. But aroma-wise, it's a lovely, lovely beer, this one. Obviously the most complex parts of this beer are going to be in that malty character that we've just described, and I like it. I really do like how that pieces together in this particular beer. So yeah, I think that does go together really, really nicely. I think that's everything we need to say about the malty and kind of yeasty side of this beer, to be quite honest with you. It's definitely an old school RIS on top of these kind of smooth Speyside whiskey barrels, if you like. So I'm curious to see where the border between the RIS and the smooth Speyside whiskey actually is. Let's look at the hoppy side of this beer then. Yeah, so hoppy side of things. As you'd guess, this beer was bottled back in 2019, so a lot of the hoppy character has dropped out of it. Before that, it was in Speyside whiskey barrels. A lot of the hoppiness is going to have gone from this one. But at the same time, you still get a little bit of that hoppy character in the beer. There's a little bit of earthiness in there. There's a little bit of herbal character. You do get the remnants of a slightly floral note, but I think the most prominent part of the green component in this beer has to be the grassiness. And that lingers there too. But like I say, this is very minimal compared to some of the other components that come out of this actual beer. So let's just have a wee look at the fruity side of things. I think that summarises exactly what we need to say about the green component of the beer. But on the fruity side of things, it's actually quite wet in a sense. For me, the backbone of the fruity side of this beer, a lot of black currant, good little bit of blackberry as well. So black currant in there, blackberry, sharper blackberries right at the front of the nose, but a bit of fig, a lot of oily juicy fig. You've got so there's a bit of raisin in there. There's a bit of plum. You've got a bit of prune, a bit of date, but not too much, I would add. It's really more black currant, blackberry, and stuff like that comes out of this one. So yeah, the way everything goes together in this beer is really quite interesting. It's got quite a wet, juicy, berryish type fruity character to it, I have to say. But regardless, whatever's going on in this one is very, very nice. So as I always say, take a wee bit of time to enjoy the aroma of the beer before you get stuck into it. This one is especially lovely, and we're quite lucky. I guess we're looking at this beer 4 years after it was bottled, and it's not often that we actually do that on the channel either. So yeah, interesting stuff. Definitely some interesting stuff here from Buxton Brewery then. I would love to know exactly what Speyside whiskey barrel they used for this. But yeah, as I always say, take a bit of time to enjoy the aroma of the beer before you get stuck into it. But I think it is about time that we try this one and see what it's all about. So this one is the Moray Flow, a 13% Imperial Stout, aged for over a year on Speyside single malt whisky barrels from Buxton Brewery in Buxton, Derbyshire, in the middle of England. Let's get stuck in. Sláinte, skål, cheers. Oh yeah. It is basically just as I thought it was going to be. It's kind of crazy after all these beer reviews that I've done. You try a beer like this and it kind of is as you would expect it to be, but you're always going to get little surprises and things as to exactly how certain flavours come out. So this is, in some ways it is exactly as I expected it would be. It's got the Russian Imperial Stout quality to it, but it has the kind of Speyside barrel smoothness. And yeah, you absolutely get that in this. But I would say the Russian Imperial Stout character in this one still has a little bit of a punch to it. And I actually thought it would have mellowed out a wee bit more than it has, in fairness. So yeah, that's really interesting in this particular regard. So yeah, interesting stuff for sure. So yeah, beautiful beer though, I will say that, absolutely. Really, really nicely done stuff, and I wouldn't expect anything less of Buxton Brewery, to be quite honest with you. Yeah, lovely balance between the barrel aging and the old school RIS type stouts with this one. I think the beer I was meaning to name, by the way, from these guys earlier was Rain Shadow, if I remember it correctly. But anyway, middle third of your palate then, let's have a little look at this. So the backbone of this beer, absolutely, you've got that lovely smooth kind of oaky character coming out of this one. That's from the Speyside whiskey, of course. So lovely smooth oaky notes forming the backbone of the beer. Further forward on that middle third of your palate, you can feel you get a little tiny touch of an oily vanilla in there. But then above the wood, you have the Speyside spirit layer. And as I said, Speyside whiskies, for me at least, compared to other ones, they tend to be a little bit more oily, they tend to have a little bit more sweetness to them, and a little bit more dried fruit, and you can certainly detect all of these elements in there on that spirit layer, if you like. So yeah, that's quite interesting when it comes to this beer. And the spirity layer, of course, lingers the further into the aftertaste that you go with this one, which I have to say I really do quite like. So you get more and more of the Moray barrel out of this one. Like, it's interesting, when you take the beer in, you get a bit of the smoothness, but then you get the RIS punch to the beer, and then it just mellows out and shows you a few more different things the further into the aftertaste that you go with it. And again, that's what I really quite like about this one. But once again, it's a beautiful Imperial Stout from Buxton Brewery, so you know, you just have to appreciate what these guys are doing. Very old school and kind of established name when it comes to the English craft beer scene, but quite rightly they have their crown and they're holding on to it for sure. But yeah, I think that describes the barrel side of this beer. So if we go on to the actual malt side of the beer, above the kind of spirit layer on this one, you get that roasty, toasty, well-fired bread crust out of this one. So you can feel that there forming the base of the beer. Above that, you have a slight layer of an almost kind of rye bready type quality, and it's quite a smooth and dense rye bread actually. So yeah, the kind of dense rye bready layer that you get out of this one is quite interesting, because above the rye bready layer, it's almost like you have a little bit of a chocolate brownie, chocolate sponge type thing, and that has a wee bit of dryness to it for sure. And then above that chocolate spongy layer, you start to get a layer of, you know, actual cocoa. So at the back of that middle third of your palate, you start to get like a sort of 80-90% cocoa chocolate, but you can feel that as you come further forward in that layer, you can feel it kind of mellows out, and it sort of mellows up to maybe be around 50% cocoa chocolate by the time you reach the back of the front of that middle third of your palate. So you can feel there's a few things going on in there. So yeah, like I say, a roasty, toasty, well-fired bread crust, a rye bready layer, like a chocolate cakey, spongy layer, then you've got the cocoa layer above that, and then you start to get some of the kind of brown sugary notes out of the beer. But I would say the brown sugary notes in this beer kind of take a little bit of a back seat. I actually thought from the aroma they were going to be a little bit more kind of pungent in a sense, and it made sense to think that because of the nature of the Speyside whiskies, to be honest. But yeah, above the kind of chocolatey cocoa layer, you start to get these more leathery brown sugary notes out of this beer, which are quite interesting. So yeah, the kind of leathery, brown, sugary notes that you get in this are good as well. So above the cocoa layer, you can feel there's a layer, there's like a circle in the middle of your palate, and it's quite a big circle. So you can feel the brown sugars have a few different layers to them. You've got a more leathery brown sugary layer to this one, which is obviously, I don't know how long this Imperial Stout will have sat on the boil for, but I think this one has had a slightly longer wort boil because you've got a good presence of leathery brown sugars out of this one. Above that, you've got a sweeter kind of, well, actually no, before that, above the leathery brown sugars, you've got a bit of a toasty, roasty caramel layer, and then you start to get some of the, above that, you start to get more of the kind of sweeter caramel elements coming out of this one, which are quite nice. So you've got, leathery caramel, roasty, toasty brown sugar, like an oily, sweet caramel bubble in there, and in the dead centre of your palate, you start to get a little bit of, that treacle molasses type note coming out of this one, which is really interesting. One other thing I would say, probably the last thing I would say about the middle third of your palate in this beer, is that you start to get a more nutty type quality out of this beer. You can feel there's a few little nutty, almondy, pecan type things as you go further into the aftertaste. But other than that, I think we've said everything that we really need to about the kind of middle third of your palate in this beer. So I like it. It gets a thumbs up from me for sure. So, back third of the palate then. Border region between middle and back third of your palate. You get a nice little bit of bready build up in this one. And it's kind of cakey in a sense. You've got a little bit of that chocolate brownie, chocolate sponge type thing in this one, but also quite a high percentage cocoa, so it has quite a bit of dryness to it. But then on the back third of the palate, you're getting this kind of similar layers there, but they're just in a slightly different context almost. So as I always say, more roasty and toasty and bitter flavours come out further back on the palate, your sweeter flavours come out further forward. You need to bear that in mind when you're tasting beers and whiskies and stuff like this. So yeah, the woody character on the base of the back third of the palate is certainly drier than it is further forward. Then you've got the spirit layer too, which comes across as being a wee bit drier. Then you have that roasty, toasty, well-fired bread crust, which gives you a lot of bitterness in the back third of the palate. You've got the rye bready layer, which is a bit taller and more airy. Then the kind of chocolate sponge layer, which again is a little bit taller and more airy. And both of these layers are, of course, a little bit drier. And then above everything else, you start to get the more kind of cocoa nibby elements out of the beer. So it's a very dry 80-90% cocoa chocolate note there, just mixed in with the cocoa nibs. And above all of that, pardon me, you start to get some of the kind of yeasty elements out of this beer. So the yeasty elements for me are quite interesting. Like, it's a very dense wholemeal brown bready type character. There's a little bit of wholemeal brown bread in there as well, but you've also got a little bit of honeycomb and woodiness and stuff like that mixed in there. But yeah, the yeasty characters in this one have kind of mellowed out a little bit, and they're very just bready and dense. But certainly on the back third of the palate, you can see that the flavours are very much taller, but as you come further forward into the middle third of your palate, they just kind of condense down and squash together that a little bit more. So there is quite a wee bit of activity going on in the middle third of your palate with this beer, which I certainly do appreciate. Yeah, interesting stuff for sure. I think that covers the malty and barrel side of this beer. So let's focus on the hoppy and fruity side of things, just to kind of round off. Back third of your palate then, back corners of the palate, I should say. So, back corners of the palate then, you've got that lovely little bit, you've got that lovely little bit of roasty, toasty kind of earthiness in there. That forms the very kind of back of the back third of your palate there. But as you move further forward, it's got a little bit of a herbal character to it, but it's still very, very earthy and roasty. And as you push further forward along the side of your palate, the mix of earthy and herbal kind of thing spreads forward, but then you start to get that nice floral aromaticity pushing its way out of the beer, which I have to say I really do quite enjoy with this one. So that's really nice. So yeah, lovely roasty, toasty earthiness in there, a bit of herbal character. and you get the nice kind of floral note in there. As we said, this beer is 4 years old, and it has been aged in the bourbon barrels before that, so it's older than that, but the amount of hoppy character that this beer actually shows in its green component is pretty damn impressive, I have to say. So yeah, nice little bit of floral aromatic spice there, but round the front curve of the tongue, the beer is certainly lighter and more grassy and a little touch more zesty, and that lingers there into the aftertaste too. So a lovely little bit of grassy, zesty character, which I have to say is very, very nice. So I think that covers the green component in this one, I have to say. But let's look at the front third of your palate then with this beer. So the border region between front third and middle third of your palate, you've got a nice little bit of a kind of bready build up in there. Nice little bit of, it's kind of like a mix of well-fired bread crust, but a wee bit of sweet rye bread and a bit of the kind of chocolatey sponge in there. You can feel that on that border region. But the base of that front third of your palate, the smooth barrel is there. Underneath you've got a little bit of the bourbon kind of brown sugar, but the well-fired bread crust as well, and the smooth brown bread. And then above that you get that nice oily bubble where the juicy fruity esters just kind of roll their way out of the beer. So that's kind of nice. We'll focus on the fruity esters coming out of this one as well. Yeah. So, the interesting thing is that when you take this beer in, you do get a nice little bit of fruitiness out of this one. When you take it in, you get a little bit of that raisiny sharpness. And we'll focus on the back of that front third of your palate and just come forward. So you get a little bit of that raisiny sharpness in there. Underneath that, you get a bit of juicy plum. Then you get the drier prunes. And then underneath everything else, you start to get the sultanas, you know, the dry white, green, grapey notes, and a bit of date in there too. As you reach the middle of that front third of your palate, you start to get the more oily, figgy characters coming out of this one. So the complexity of the fruity side of this beer is at the back of that front third of your palate with this beer. But I will say that the more you drink of this one, the sharper the fruity notes get. So when you first take this beer in, you get a lot of blackberry, you get a lot of blackberry and a lot of raisiny sharpness out of this one. But the beer mellows out the further you go with it. So like I said, in the front, in the middle of that front third of your palate, you've got a lovely, juicy, oily, figgy note coming out of this one. But as you push into the front half of that front third of your palate, you start to get a more black curranty base and then a blackberry sharpness just sitting on top of that. And it's the blackberry sharpness that just kind of lingers into the aftertaste with this one. So yeah, I really like how that pieces together, to be honest with you. It gets a thumbs up from me. I really do like how the fruity character comes out in this one, and the sort of sharpness that the fruity notes give you is in contrast a little bit to the roasty, toasty, well-fired nature of the beer, and also the kind of dryness that you get out of the cocoa nibs and the brown sugar in this one too. So yeah, this is a proper old school Russian Imperial Stout, and the Speyside barrels in this one are really just giving it a little bit of smoothness and dryness into the aftertaste. That's probably a very good way to kind of sum this one up. But yeah, I think on that note we can move on and round off this review with a wee look at the mouthfeel. So let's do that. So yeah, for me, this beer, absolutely full-bodied. Carbonation is very, very smooth in this one. Yeah, very smooth and kind of silky mouthfeel to an extent. There's a lot of bitterness and dryness in this beer. I wouldn't be surprised if this is up there around the kind of 80 IBU mark, but it is quite easy to conflate dryness and bitterness in this beer because you've got the roastiness from the malt base, but you've also got the dryness from the barrels in this one. But the dryness you get out of the beer does tend to be a little bit more kind of sweet and smooth the further into the aftertaste you go. But yeah, your malt base has a bit of everything: roastiness, smoothness, sweetness, dryness, wee bit of everything in there. the hoppy character in this beer. There is a little bit of that, like we said, a lot of it will have dropped out, but I do still find you get a bit of hoppy floral character out of the beer, but then the fruitiness as well balanced between the sharp, juicy side of things and the more kind of oily, dry character as well. But yeah, the way the beer goes together in this one is quite, it really is quite interesting. I've certainly enjoyed reviewing this one for you. It's not all that often I can review a 4-year-old stout. This one, it's 4 years in the bottle, I should say, but another year in the barrels before that, so it's right to say it's a 5-year-old beer. But yeah, I think this has been a really nice experience. We always get good stouts from Buxton Brewery, and yeah, for me the Speyside element on this one was really cool, because obviously I studied chemistry in Aberdeen, so I became fairly familiar with a number of the Speyside whiskies over the years. But yeah, I think that's a nice place to sign off on this one. All we can say is that it's a really interesting beer, this one from Buxton Brewery, who we know do some very, very good stuff. So let's leave it at that for this review. This one was the Moray Flow, a 13% Russian Imperial Stout aged on single malt Speyside whisky barrels for over a year from Buxton Brewery in Buxton, Derbyshire, England. Really cool to review this one for you, and I hope you guys enjoyed my take on it. So anyway, let me know your own thoughts on this beer in the comment section below if you happen to have come across this one. Let me know what your favourite beers are from Buxton Brewery as well. We will no doubt return to these guys again in the very near future, but in the meantime, check out my social media, check out their social media. A little bit of a longer review for you this time, but I have to say I certainly enjoyed this one. So until the next time, Slàinte, Skål, cheers, check out my social media, check out Buxton's social media, and I'll see you guys soon, but a very special beer I have to say. Slàinte, Skål, and cheers.